Good morning. Welcome to INSA Coffee and Conversations with Juliane Gallina. I now like to play a video from our sponsor, Adobe. I'd now like to introduce INSA President Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Good morning. That was an amazing video. If you've not had any coffee yet, that would certainly get you going. Appreciate that, Adobe. I really appreciate everyone joining us today for Tuesday's Coffee and Conversation with Juliane Gallina. I am pleased to say we have over 700 registrants for today's program. Before we get started, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping rules with our virtual attendees. On the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see an area where you can submit your questions. I would encourage you to do so and also include your name and your organization. As a reminder, today's program is open to the press and on the record and will be available within about 24 hours on INSA's website. Now, it's my pleasure to thank Adobe today for sponsoring this webinar. Without Adobe's generous support, we would not be able to make this connection with our viewers. Now I'd like to introduce Michael Barr, who is the Director of the National Security Group at Adobe, who will introduce our speaker. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Adobe's honored to work with INSA supporting events like today, and we look forward to our partnership with INSA in future virtual events. With increased emphasis on remote work, we have provided focused support for remote content security through our Adobe Experience Manager and making business process more remote through automated forms and electronic signatures with Adobe Sign. It's with great anticipation that we have this session. Juliane Gallina has had a prominent career both within the public and private sector. She has held leadership roles as a civilian and in military uniform. As the current Chief Information Officer and Director of the Information Technology Enterprise for the CIA, Ms. Gallina oversees CIA IT systems, personnel, and the organization's global network. She plays a leading role in CIA's growing partnerships with industry and ensuring the agency harnesses advanced digital technologies. Prior to her current role, Ms. Gallina served as the Vice President of IBM's U.S. Federal Key Accounts. Juliane was commissioned as a naval officer at the U.S. Naval Academy and retired as a reserve officer in 2013. Given her incredible background, there's no one better to give us a perspective on this long, strange trip we call 2020. Welcome, Juliane, and back to you, Suzanne.
Well said, Michael. Thank you. So I see questions rolling in right now. I would encourage you all to continue to submit them. I really enjoyed our prep sessions with Juliane, getting to know her a little bit better as well as her role. So Juliane, I'd love to kick off with our first question, which is related to your time in the public sector and how your role as CIO has changed anything about your view of innovation or as an innovator.
Well, good morning, Suzanne. Thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it, and I'm really glad to be joined by a broad community of professionals who took the time today to have coffee with us. And I also want to thank Michael Barr and Adobe in particular for helping us with the sponsorship. I appreciate their technology innovation, and I think they're the perfect sponsor to help us have this conversation. So your question is about how my view of technology innovation has changed now that I'm CIO. Is that the gist of the question?
Yeah, and how your public sector experience has sort of influenced your leadership there at CIA. And before you answer that question, I would want you to check and see if your camera is turned on, if that little green button right below the telephone emoji, so to speak. There you are. Yay. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
So anyway, just talking about your public sector, you worked for the government, then you were in the public sector, and now you're back with the government, and maybe how your time in the private sector has influenced you as a leader there at CIA.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I grew up in the Navy. I took the oath for the first time when I was 17 to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So I feel like I came of age in the Navy, in the service in uniform. And it's very hard for me to tease out what parts of my worldview came from truly my family of origin as well as the Navy. They're sort of intertwined at this point. So I really credit my Navy roots for a lot of my outlook, especially when it comes to taking care of people. But my public sector experience, of course, I pivoted from the Navy into the CIA and then went to a couple of experiences in public sector. They're really varied in a very short period of time. I jumped from the agency into a small startup of about 35 people. We were purchased by a holding company. So I was in this odd phase of time when I was with other small companies and we were becoming a mid-sized company. And then we flipped again to IBM. So in a few years, I really think I had tremendous dynamic range to understand the breadth of a lot of different industry experiences, what it's like to be in a startup. And I tell you, it was like, as many of you in the audience know, it was like a roller coaster. You'd have the thrills and joys of thinking, oh my goodness, we just landed a deal, and then the next day worrying, but are we going to make payroll? It was the whole dynamic range, and understanding that success in business meant taking care of the men and women with whom you were working, and truly when you knew not only your colleagues' spouses' names, but the names of their children. And if you didn't actually work and succeed in business, you might have to let them go. It was really a very, very serious to me at the time. And I think that's really made me, as a government leader now, with part of my portfolio role to work directly with industry, has made me very empathetic. Because I had felt at times when I was in industry that there was sometimes a bit of a caste system in with government and industry, where government can sometimes be kind of reductionist, I would say, about the relationship with industry, to reduce industry people to a caricature, to say, well, the motivation here is only profit. And I think serious professionals think about much more than just profit and care very deeply about our mission too. So I think it's made me very empathetic to business leaders who want to engage with our office, who want to engage with our team. I really want to have that open door to help business leaders connect us to the very best ideas in industry. And I really think that comes from my industry experience.
I think empathy is a great leadership skill. Something I wanted to ask you, why Navy?
Oh, gosh. When I was a kid, I was the daughter of a single mom. We lost my father very early, and my father had been in the Navy, which probably had something to do with that connection. But honestly, at that point, it had been quite some time since we lost my dad. So I had gotten to the point where I really wanted to do something really challenging. And I was first entranced by stories and newspaper articles I was reading about Sally Ride, who was the first female astronaut in the United States, and then others like Mae Jemison, but also some of the early astronauts. So it was really the space program that got me interested in studying engineering in the first place. And I really thought I wanted to be an astronaut. I could talk a little bit more about why that is a very good thing I never did that. But because of all that, I started reading, how do you actually become an astronaut? And I learned in the early days that Navy and Marine Corps aviators featured prominently in the early space programs. So men like John Glenn, I have a picture of him in my office, as a matter of fact, because he was an inspiration to me when I was young, a Marine Corps aviator, and Alan Shepard, Naval Academy graduate, and an early astronaut as well. They were just amazing, amazing men.
Well, thank you for your service. And you can look on our screen here and access some books and podcasts that Juliane recommended for our virtual attendees. Any specific ones, Juliane, that you want to point out and the reason why you particularly have been drawn to them?
Sure. Yeah, so there were two there about innovation, which I think were really squarely about the subject matter today, and I was hoping we could talk a little bit about those. In particular, the Innovator's Dilemma and Crossing the Chasm, I think, have some ideas about technology transfer in particular that affected me when I was in industry and really shaped the way I was thinking. And now that I'm CIO and see it from a different perspective, I think that they continue to inform me and help me understand how to make tech transfer more successful in government. So we can talk more about those if you're interested. I think it was when I was in industry working on artificial intelligence that somebody recommended the book Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. And I think it's considered a classic for people who study marketing in particular, because it was written by a man who went into marketing, and it was really about how do you approach different segments of your market, and it broke it up in a very different way. So I think even in the notes that were prepared for this talk, somebody captured the book cover, and in it you can see that there's this sort of normal bell curve distribution, and it looks like it's chunked up a bit. The point of the book, and I'm going to give you just like a quick, my little book report, I think, was to help people who are trying to accomplish that connection with the people who in our government parlance would be the people with the mission need, the actual end users and the people who are going to purchase this technology, connect them with the folks who are bringing the technology to the market, new technologies. If you think about it instead of by org design, but you think of it differently as a distribution that shows you who are the earliest adopters and who are the later adopters and what motivates them, then you have to tailor your approach for each segment of that market. So where he talks what I thought was really interesting is this idea of the chasm, and the title of the book is Crossing the Chasm. And he talks about how after you have these early adopters, this is on the left side of the distribution, these people who just after the true innovators really don't care if technology is hard to use, they just want to be first, they're fascinated by the technology. Then you have these early adopters, and these are people who are really going to try and adapt and apply that technology for use cases in the context of a domain. So those folks are typically willing to put up with some inconveniences. The technology may not work perfectly, but they're very much fascinated by the vision of the future, and they can imagine how that technology will apply later. Well, the chasm is between that group and then the early adopters, people who are in the majority. The early majority. The early majority are people who are kind of mainstream. They're responsible for running an operation, and they're willing to adopt new technology, but they don't want to put up with any inconvenience. And so you can imagine where you have these folks on the very early side next to the early majority. There's a big chasm between them because they want different things. Pure innovation, willing to put up with inconvenience, versus people who really want it to be super convenient. And I didn't appreciate that when I was in industry. It took me a while to appreciate it anyway.
Right.
I thought, hey, we have this great, cool AI technology, first to market. Who doesn't want to try this? Look how transforming it can be to your operation. Not really deeply appreciating how the folks in the early majority make up the majority, hence the name, and you really have to make things easy for them to adopt it and use it because they have a real job to do. And I think that was something that took me a while to learn. So it still informs me today because I think that chasm between the two groups is real, And government typically organizes its innovation efforts with people who are these innovators, who really love to tinker with technology and are willing to put up with inconvenience, and they don't appreciate what's on the other side of the chasm. So kind of a long-winded book summary, but it's really changed the way I think about tech transfer.
And so where do you fit in that kind of spectrum, or has that changed at all? Like when you read the book, could you see yourself and where you were?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when I was in industry, depending on which role I was in, for many years when I was focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning, now, I mean, this is going back about 8 years, that was quite early in this post-AI winter world where AI has now become a buzzword and every company has it on their website. Back then, we'd have to spend a lot of time with clients just teaching and orienting them to the technology because people didn't really understand how machine learning led to what we might anticipate as true AI in the future. So there was a lot of education involved. And yes, I would say I was an innovator then. I was in an innovator role. I was empowered to do that, but I wasn't responsible for running an operation. So I'll tell you, Suzanne, I'll ask you a question. Do you know why God was able to create the world in 7 days and everything in it in the universe and light and dark and everything?
I don't know. Would you enlighten me?
Well, it was easy for God because he had no legacy systems. So the point there is, I'm kind of making light of something that people take very seriously, obviously, but the point there is when you're responsible for everything that you're dragging along with the legacy and you have a mission to maintain, it gets a little more challenging to have that chasm get crossed. It's not so easy to just focus 100% on innovation. So now that I'm in a role where I am responsible for the daily operations as well, it's the innovation piece is a part of the overall portfolio, and you want to empower everyone to feel responsible for it, but you recognize it's one of many things that you do.
Right. Well, it's easier to build a new house, right, than to renovate an old one sometimes. So that's my analogy today. So anyway, so what do you think CIA has done to better align itself to reap the benefits of tech transfer?
Oh my gosh, this is a decades long story. I think it probably goes back to the founding because it's been an organization that continually reinvents itself from the inside out, renews and modernizes its tradecraft and its technology, and yet keeps its core values and its core mission. So I would say for the tech transfer, to really drill into that question in particular, I'd point to a 2 decades long relationship that we've had with a venture capital organization, InQtel, as a really great example where the agency has invested in technology, emerging technology, to get ahead and to really keep pace with the commercial industry, especially when we saw technologies blossoming in Silicon Valley over 20 years ago. So InQtel has been a great source of not only specific technologies, but relationships with industry. And it's given us an opportunity to have a presence across the country with small companies to help get access to non-traditional vendors who might have new technologies and understand how to apply them in new and different ways. That's been a very successful partnership. I think more recently, I would point to a new organization in the Directorate of Digital Innovation. That's the directorate where I reside. And it's a directorate that's new since our modernization about 4 years ago. The Digital Futures organization is part of that. It was really led initially by Teresa Smetzer, who's now with Salesforce. And Teresa was just such a great leader and had a vision for changing the way our agency would engage with industry, creating a channel where InQtel in the past had been focused on some small and non-traditionals. Digital Futures was a complementary organization that allowed folks to focus on new and emerging technologies, from not just the small and new and different companies, but also traditional companies, big tech firms, and that's really broadened the aperture. And then she also did something which I think is really cool, is create innovation outposts for us. So we have a Silicon Valley Innovation Outpost, and just recently, after she's retired, and now under the leadership of Karen Warwick, who's now at the DNI, and Vanita Fordham, who was her deputy and has been acting leader of Digital Futures, they established the Northern Virginia Innovation Outpost, or NVIX, which is just a really cool place to have that exchange in an unclassified open environment, and to have some laboratory space as well. And those are just two examples. I mean, there's examples of this kind of organization to accelerate tech transfer kind of peppered throughout our CIA organization.
So you mentioned NQTEL, you mentioned NVIX. In this space of tech transfer, how can industry be a better partner to your organization?
So, industry, what's been blowing me away and is the pace with which industry brings us new ideas. So coming from sitting in our CIO front office, our staff will have probably a dozen or so invitations to see a new technology every week. And that's on top of some of the recurring exchanges that we have with our strategic vendors, in addition to the battle rhythm that we've already set up through our strategic vendor management plan and organization, as well as other standard RFPs, RFIs, that kind of thing. That's just my little office, right? Getting these offers to look and see things. One thing, and this seems super tactical, but one thing that industry could do that would be really helpful, and this brings us back to that idea of crossing the chasm, is understand that we always want to know about new companies, and we always want to know about what companies can do in a big picture sense. But it really helps us to focus and think about specific applications and problem solving when companies can come with a developed point of view about how their technology applies. So my personal request would be, when coming forward with a request for a meeting, a general meeting that's just a capability overview, like, hey, here's all the things my company can do, good, but probably not going to get the higher priority. If you have a specific recommendation on, we have this technology idea, how it's going to solve a very specific problem within your organization for a particular mission outcome, that gets prioritized much higher. So again, with the volume of requests that we get, partnership with industry requires more of the intersection of the technology with the domain expertise, really understanding our mission and helping us solve specific problems.
That was a great answer. I know a lot of our virtual attendees in the private sector appreciated your being so candid, that really something specific versus general would be of greater benefit to you and your team. So thank you. I would encourage folks to keep sending in questions. The first attendee question I will ask is from my boss, Tish Long. And she says, good morning, Juliane. Thank you for chatting with us this morning. How was the work from home pivot for CIA? And both the Air Force and the Army have pilots underway to enable access to classified up to secret information from home. Is there a similar initiative at CIA or elsewhere in the IC? And I think this was, probably in the paper this morning, brought to light, so probably a lot of folks read about it as well.
Good morning, Tish, and thank you for your question, and thank you for your sponsorship here. I appreciate the venue. So we've been tracking the developments across the national security industry and how our colleagues and other organizations, defense and other intel community partners, are doing some really great things with work from home solutions. I would note even one of your successors, the Admiral, has hosted all hands at NGA these were unclassified, so not high to low situation, but unclassified all hands from inside his building, and reached out to his entire workforce. And I think NGA has been really just a tremendous leader in this area. I would also tell you I've been encouraged and heartened by the collaboration I have with the other ICCIOs. Under John Sherman's leadership, of course, he's the outgoing. I know you did a coffee conversation with him also. John Sherman has brought us together periodically, myself and other CIOs from the Intel community throughout the pandemic to talk about, the wardrobe malfunction, to talk about how the other Intel community agencies are making that same pivot. And it's been just a great exchange to see what we can learn from one another, where the commonalities are, but also where our missions may be unique or our security posture dictates that we won't be as forward-leaning. So, of course, the CIA may be perceived as the most conservative in this area because we would consider our security and CI threats and concerns to be of the utmost importance. And so I'm not going to go into any detail about how we've enabled work from home solutions to access our networks. But I will say one of the pivots that we've done, which I think really deserves some mention here, is a pivot to promote work by our industry counterparts on the unclassified networks in an unclassified domain. Our tradition at the agency has been to do most, if not all, of our development work, if not all, in a SCIF or secure environment, really the majority of it, in our own buildings or possibly in our industry partner buildings at a secure level. And it's always been considered a huge cultural shift to try and adapt things so that our industry partners can build and develop for us at an unclassified level. Well, I'm really excited because I'll tell you, when I turn to my senior leader team in the IT enterprise and ask them, this was in concert with Margaret Augustine, our Office of the Procurement Executive. I said, we have to go as fast as we can during this pandemic to get people working, because people want to work. They have so many good things to do, and there is a lot of good content that we can accomplish on the low side in an unclassified environment. Within 2 weeks, just one of our office components, this is in the Office of Mission Applications, within 10 working days, had completed over 82 contract actions and had put over 600 contractors back to work in an unclassified domain. That's just one office. I was blown away because we'd say, guys, be as creative as you can, always be secure, always work with the co-char to make sure the scope is appropriate, but and the CO, of course. But when you get those folks together and you can get agreement on what work can be done outside and the low side, move out and make it happen. And they did. It was brilliant. Another partner, Sam Cottrell, and I have been talking. He's a GDIT. And he gave me this remarkable statistic. He said before COVID, his team had approximately 20 people working unclassified work for us, just 20. As of today, he has several hundred working. That's just one industry partner. So I think the pivot's been tremendous, and I hope this will last beyond the pandemic. We have to keep people working and focus on, I like to say, work is a product, not a place. So let's focus on the outcomes, not the place where we're working. Let's stay secure. Let's be smart about maintaining custody of our code and working in zero trust environments, but let's push the work outside our building.
I think that's a very realistic and solid stance. And I've had several questions come in already on that subject. So shifting gears just a little bit, there's a young man by the name of Grant Allard from Clemson University, and he tunes in for most of these. Grant, shoot me an IM later. I want to know what you're studying at Clemson. Your professor should be giving you a little extra credit for participating in these during the summer. But Grant asks, what challenges does the tech transfer ecosystem of CIA experience? How do you overcome them? And then I've got several very rapid fire questions after this one. So I'll let you answer Grant's question first, and then I've got several more for you that are coming in.
So Grant, I'm so glad to hear you're attending. Thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. It's very flattering. I just want to give a little shout out to my former colleagues from Clemson. When I was in IBM, I was gifted with a team. This was in the software unit. There were just a handful of them, but there were like a clutch of Clemson graduates. There were recent graduates that had come in through a college hire program. And I have to tell you, they were just the most delightful, wonderful, high energy, fun group of team members. I adored them, and I just think the world of Clemson as a result. So good on you guys. You know, I before that experience knew nothing about the school, but I was just so impressed by their culture and their work ethic. Really, really impressive group of people. So your question is about the challenges in our tech transfer ecosystem. Well, I tell you, it's instinctive, I think, for government to organize around an initiative. So, you know, typically I'm like, okay, I'm grossly oversimplifying here, but just work with me. Really simple overview. Government leaders, when they can, if they want to get something done, typically they will create an organization around it, fund it, put really good people in it, and say, like, go solve this problem. And so with technology and tech transfer and innovation, a lot of times you'll see people kind of designated as the innovation experts. You create an organization and you put good people in it, and they feel empowered to do tech transfer. But the reality is it's that chasm again. And the problem with the ecosystem is that you have created this situation where innovation is put on an island. It's like the othering of innovators. So then you get a challenge where people who feel empowered to be innovators can say, oh, well, everyone else is not doing innovation. I own innovation. And you begin to see some organizational friction where people who are not given the responsibility or the authority to do the tech transfer, they don't necessarily welcome or happily receive the technology that has come from those innovation outposts, using that term generally. So one of the challenges that we're trying to address, and I'm working with Bill Spalding, the new director of Digital Futures, and Anita Forden, the deputy, to really establish mechanisms and processes so that there's essentially like a Sherpa to help guide the technology from the innovation incubator into the enterprise. Someone who can help them navigate that valley of death, come out of a prototype, but already have the connections with the line of business so that the people who are responsible for the operations are anticipating, shaping, and partnering with the innovation experts to make sure that they're getting what they really want. And this requires some thinking through what are all the things that the receiving organization needs the new technology to have. For example, the new technology, one of the big obstacles for us is our authorization and accreditation, our security practices. We know that we have a very high standard for security for our technologies, and when they come into our enterprise, they have to go through this accreditation process, which has been laborious. So if you can encourage the new tech initiatives to meet the security standards early and be engaged with security experts so that they're building it in from the beginning, it makes that accreditation process much easier later on. That's just one example of a way that we can help facilitate that tech transfer.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I believe you've been gold blue teaming it there at CIA possibly, and you have a family, and so how have you been managing personally, during this very unusual and very challenging period in our lives, other than reading books?
Yeah. So, well, I do have a busy family. It's 3-generational. My parents live with us, and I have my 3 children, college, high school, and a 2nd grader under the roof. 2 dogs and a partridge in a pear tree. So we are a very busy family. I think it's come with joy and with concerns. Obviously, I'm concerned for members of the community who haven't had the opportunity to work, and really concerned about the health and welfare of our larger community, as well as the safety of our family and friends. So given that, I think my husband and I have really tried to focus on, with our children and parents, how grateful we are that we've had this opportunity to continue to work. My husband from home, and I've been able to work productively throughout. During the reserve time when I am home, I've done things like this, Suzanne. I've really tried to engage industry, because I can do this much more easily from my home office than I can from the work office. It opened up a lot of opportunity for me to engage industry. So I've treasured those moments. I have to say, I've had to fit those in among my daughter's 2nd grade obligations, because I've learned a lot about the 2nd grade curriculum since I was home on my reserve week. So I spent a lot of time with my children, helping them with school. My older kids don't need the help so much, but I was really amazed by how much time and effort it took to help an elementary school kid through her curriculum. And I think as a manager, that's helped me a lot too. As I anticipate the return of our workforce and our reconstitution, we care about the health and safety of our workforce. We want everyone to come back into the building to feel safe. And we've spent a lot of time and effort to make sure we can maintain social distance in our buildings, and we're keeping everyone safe. But it's also made me feel empathetic to our workforce, understanding that after spending time with their families and seeing the very real obligations parents have to their children in these off weeks when school is out, we have to accommodate in some way to enable maximum flexibility for our employees when they come back. So we're really looking for ways to help them navigate that uncertainty and apprehension. When I'm in the office, we've spent a good bit of time talking about safe reconstitution and helping our workforce return.
I think that's important. And again, you touched on empathy. I think, these days can be a little humbling as some of us do navigate online learning with young people, and it can be very challenging. So we've got a question here from Matt Scott with Mission Tech Solutions, and we have about 7 more minutes, so I'm going to do these pretty quickly. Matt wants to know, how do you prioritize IT access to small businesses and the innovation that these small businesses bring to the agency?
Hi, Matt. Thank you for that question. How do we prioritize it? We prioritize it very high. I think the investment in InQtel is just an example, but we really encourage our partners and use NVIX, the Northern Virginia Innovation Outpost, as well as SVIO, as a place where small companies who may not be rigged to, they may not be accustomed to working with our big agency, they may not know how to navigate it. The NVIX and SVIO venues are really great because they are unclassified, and unclassified work can get done. My own organization, ITE, has what we call the iLab, or Innovation Lab. That's also an unclassified lab. We work with small companies there as well. And those places tend to be really good because if you don't have a cage code, or you don't have a very large cleared workforce, and you don't have boots on the ground to scout out opportunities in our building, but you have great ideas and a very mature point of view on how your technology can apply for our mission problems, we want to talk to you. So it's a very high priority, and there are venues for that. If you want, and I would say this for anyone listening, our front office staff works with the strategic vendor management team in our ITE to prioritize and triage inbound requests. So if you do have an idea, we want to hear about it, and you can send it to a group email address. It's CIO_front_office@ucia.gov. And it's really easy to get a hold of us, and we'll help you navigate.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So Grant Allard wants to know what the key goals for tech transfer at CIA are. Are there any specific goals, and how do you measure that success?
That's a great question. So yeah, if anyone who spends time with me knows I love using metrics. I love to drive by a dashboard and understand where we are. So with different technology investments, I would say there are overarching technology strategy, but also subordinate ones. So for example, with artificial intelligence, I'll use that as an example. Artificial intelligence is an important strategic objective for us with tech transfer. And right now we're working with an industry partner to do an assessment of our current maturity so we can establish our baseline and understand where in our portfolio we need to invest in AI. And then we measure, and with that assessment, we'll be able to measure and quantify how much progress we're making toward a maturity model. So that's kind of a general answer about how we might think about the metrics. Without more specifics about which technology area, it's hard to say what our specific goals are. I'm not sure I'm answering the question adequately there, Suzanne. Is there anything else you think I should focus on there?
He mentioned qualitatively and quantitatively, if there are any specific stories, which might be difficult for you to add any context on. I don't know.
So yeah, in this context, it would be hard to talk quantitatively. That's a good conversation for inside our building, because there are specific metrics that we look for within particular technology domains. But I would say for me in ITE, as the director of ITE, there really have been two overarching strategic goals. For me, making sure that our operational readiness stance is ideal. We are striving to be poised for any hazard, any danger, any threat, and want to make sure our IT enterprise is resilient, redundant, et cetera. So operational readiness. And then on the other hand, a big modernization effort for us is to think about our global operations and ensuring that our modernization efforts are really focused on the digital experience of officers who might serve anywhere in the world. So, and I would just generally term that field modernization or a field forward point of view. Okay, so if those are the two overarching goals, some of the things that we're investing in or we continue to invest in for modernization efforts are still an acceleration of our cloud efforts, an investment and strategy for artificial intelligence. We continue to invest in all kinds of efforts with virtualization and different kinds of movement up the stack. So not just from infrastructure as a service, but platform as a service, software as a service. I could go on. And there's certainly an emphasis on mobility for our employees as well. So those are four areas where I'd say we still consider we have hard problems and we're modernizing.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for the clarification. So we have just a few moments left. Are there any closing thoughts you want to share with our virtual attendees today?
Well, I just want to say, in this troubled time, it's with the pandemic and also in our country where there's been peaceful protests calling out possible actual injustices. I know it's been a troubled time for people in our community as well. And it's been a joy to talk with you, Suzanne, but I think it's worth mentioning here because you've been so gracious to give me this opportunity to share that I just want people to know that one of the priorities that we also have, in addition to focusing on the technology, is our people and our workforce. And that really gets back to one of the first questions you mentioned. Someone asked me, how did the Navy prepare me for my role now as the CIO? And I would say the Navy really taught me a lot about people and people leadership. I aspire to be a servant leader, and it's always a work in progress, obviously, but I'm aspiring that way. And with that in mind, I just want to mention that I believe I'm completely in alignment with my director, Director Haspel, and my boss, the Director of Digital Innovation, to say that we value equality and we seek to create a diverse and inclusive environment. And one of the focus areas for us is to create places for conversation and to make sure all of our employees come together fully with all of their experiences, all their backgrounds to contribute to the mission. And that's really a Navy view too. It's one fight, one mission, and we have to do it all together. So diversity and inclusion is really important. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, I'm really glad you closed with that, and appreciate your providing our attendees to connect with you in your home. You mentioned diversity and inclusion, and I'll give a plug out to our event coming up. It's a week-long event called the New IC, Empowering Women and Engaging Men. We'll have a whole day focused on diversity and inclusion, and we do have some representation from your agency as well as from the public, private, and academic sectors across the IC. But wanted to thank everybody for watching online today, and of course thank Adobe for your support. I wanted to remind you all that tomorrow afternoon, Suzanne White, who is the Deputy Director of DIA, will be joining me for another conversation. And also mention that this afternoon we will be hosting a panel called The Codeless Future of IT. All these events are on our website. We also did open registration for our summit that we partner with AFCEA on, that's in September. So take a look at the virtual lineup for that event. Instead of a 2-day live summit, it will be a 3-day event. And I really wish everyone a good Tuesday. Thanks again to Adobe and Juliane, really appreciate your time. We look forward to having you back again, possibly maybe in a live venue one day. So have a good day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.